The past and present of the star-spangled man Steve Rogers are all colliding in the pages of Captain America #1, a brand new ongoing series courtesy of legendary comic book scribe and nerd icon J. Michael Straczynski, making his grand Marvel return after almost a decade. What'll happen next? Well, let's hop on in together and find out, shall we? So then, as we join the book, it's an average day in the life of Captain America. He's riding his sick-ass motorcycle and defeating a supervillain who was using a giant robot to kill a romantic rival. A pretty successful day at the office when you're Cap. Here's the thing though, this issue, and I'm going to assume this entire story arc, is actually more about Steve and his civilian life than it actually is about him as a superhero. Though, as we see all throughout this story, there's more than one way to be a hero. Steve actually tries to go to his apartment manager and ask him about when they're going to fix the damage from his last supervillain fight, only to find out that the property manager is being fired and the company that actually owns the building is evicting everyone so they can tear down the building and flip it for a profit. Obviously this is terrible, but it hits Steve particularly hard because if you've been paying attention, during the last run Steve had actually moved back into his family's apartment, the place that his mother and father lived, the place that he grew up, a place that is very important to him and a place that he is willing to fight for, not just for himself but for everyone in the building. Steve calls up Tony Stark Iron Man and gets himself a loan so that he can buy the building outright and offer rent control and renovation to all the people living there. And yes, I know Tony Stark actually lost his company and most of his money over in his solo book right now. Maybe Straczynski didn't get caught up with that series as much as he got caught up with Cap. Or I don't know, maybe the Avengers have a rainy day fund or something. Long story short, Steve Rogers is now officially a landlord, and man, I never thought I'd say this, but Hawkeye did it first. Naturally, being the good guy that he is, Steve throws himself into his work right away, trying to fix up the building and make it a much nicer place for people to live. We're also introduced to an extended family friend of Steve, a nice elderly nurse lady who apparently also knew Steve's mom back in the day. This lady tries to feed Steve so they can keep his strength up for all the renovations. Apparently she feeds people all over the neighborhood, including a family who lives in their van on the same block. Steve and his friend here get to talking and the lady crunches some numbers that no one has actually crunched before, and that is, hey, your mother and father died by the time you were 14 and you didn't join the army until you were 18. That means you lived alone in New York for 4 years? How have we never heard that story before? Well, guess what? You get the chance to hear it now. Apparently, Steve had actually managed to stay in the family apartment for about 3 months before falling behind on rent and eventually getting kicked out. Meaning that there was actually a good number of years there where Steve Rogers himself was actually homeless, scrapping and surviving, doing everything he needed to get by, working terrible, back-breaking, dead-end jobs just to make ends meet. Which, you know, probably goes further to explain why Steve was willing to go out of his way to move back into his old family apartment and why he's fighting so hard to save the building now. We're also reintroduced to Steve's childhood friend Arnie Roth, a character who was really important during the J.M. DeMathis years and will actually end up being one of the more important characters when it comes to Marvel's history of not only Jewish representation but also queer representation too. It seems that Arnie and Steve sold papers together on the street, the Bugle, naturally. A paper that they know never printed the truth, but at the same time they both feel horrified when they read about the mounting tensions in Europe and how so many of the European powers have already rolled over for Hitler and the Nazis, meaning that World War II is going to sadly be inevitable. Now, back in the present, Steve takes a break from construction work to be recruited by Sue Storm and the Fantastic Four to help them deal with a threat over in the Microverse. It seems that Psycho Man, alongside his multiversal daughter Psycho Woman, are making all sorts of trouble in Subatomica. And if you just rolled your eyes at how absolutely shamelessly comic booky that sentence was, don't worry, because that was the whole joke. Captain America helps the Fantastic Four win their battle and returns home. The only problem is that time moves differently in the Microverse, meaning that by the time Steve gets home, he's actually been gone a couple days, and he can't rest for a second either as he ends up stopping a botched robbery on his street, with a little help from the father of that family who lives in a van on their street, I should mention. Steve is actually so grateful he buys this guy's lunch and hears his story. Apparently this guy worked construction but fell on hard times when the mall he was building lost all funding. Now him and his young daughter move from place to place looking for work and trying to dodge tickets. Well geez, that's convenient. Steve Rogers just undertook a massive construction project right now and he could use all the hands he could get. And hey, because we also found out Steve Rogers has his own long history with being down and out, it only makes sense that he's willing to extend a hand to this guy not only as a hero, but as a good guy. Now, this story feels like it's taking place more in a series of vignettes than in actual chronological order. It's because it totally is. From there, we transition on over to the jungle, where an aging billionaire and his put-upon guide look for the Tomb of Asmodee, also known as the Undying, also known as an ancient evil who bargains for souls with mortals. Basically, it's the devil. He's looking for the devil. And you know what? Hats off. I actually love little horror story interplays like this, wherein the guide makes fun of this old dude for so desperately trying to sell his soul, even though everyone knows that's a bad deal, only for it to ultimately be revealed that, oh hey, me the guide, I was actually the devil all along. And I just had to test you to make sure you were really serious about the whole selling your soul thing and you're not going to do any takesy-backsies on me. The old blood money billionaire's wish is granted, and he ends up getting returned to a more youthful state before eventually seeking out an exiled AIM scientist as part of a much bigger nefarious scheme. And no, they leave it a little open-ended whether or not this was the old guy's idea from the beginning, or if this is part of a bigger, evil, devilish influence. Now, back in the past, Arnie tells Steve that he may have found him a place to live. The only problem is that he's going to have to pay $30 up front, which for Steve might just be $1 billion for all he's concerned. Steve managed to raise most of the money, but unfortunately let himself go hungry along the way. In fact, he's so gaunt a passerby in the park makes him an offer he can't refuse. Well, hey there, Spot, you're looking mighty famished. Well, I know just a place where you can fill your tummy. There's a political rally going on in the park today, and these fellas are peachy keen and on the level, I tell ya. Steve goes to get himself a sandwich, only to be horrified to see that this event is being put on by the American German Bun. Never heard of them? Well, they were a real group that existed in New York at the time. And if you couldn't tell, they were an American Nazi fan club. Isn't history fun, everyone, when it's not being horrifying? And so that was Captain America issue number 1, everybody. And overall, I thought this one was pretty good. Not great, not mind-blowing, but there's definitely a lot of places to grow. I'm not gonna lie, a part of me is still a little disappointed that the Lanzig and Kelly Captain America series had to be ended so prematurely to make room for this one. And because this is the big triumphant return of J. Michael Straczynski to Marvel Comics after almost a decade away, my expectations were high, probably too high. This series certainly has a lot of good ideas going on and a lot of places for it to grow, but it also has a lot of ideas that I feel like I've seen too many times before, both in Captain America stories and in other Marvel stories. I get the distinct feeling before starting this series, Straczynski was given maybe a Cold Note version of everything that's been happening in Captain America and across the Marvel Universe. So while he gets the bigger continuity stuff right, there are some little small granular things that kind of bug me. Credit where credit is due, though. I appreciate that they're trying to fill in Steve Rogers' life history by focusing on an era that is so rarely ever covered, while also showing the events of what happened to Steve in the past shape the type of man he is today and still informs his decisions going forward, both as a hero and as a good guy. Overall, I think I feel comfortable giving this one a 7.5 out of 10. It's pretty good. I'll definitely be interested to come back and see where it comes from here, though I get the sneaking suspicion this is going to end up being one of those series that reads much better in trade. Hey there everyone, it's your old pal Cape Jewel again, thanking you so much for watching to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, why not check out my Amazon link down in the description. Yes, that's right, the Cape Jewel channel officially has its own Amazon storefront now. You can pick up a comic or anything else for that matter, and if you did, you'd really be helping me in the channel. So with that out of the way everyone, I will see you again next time. Bye-bye.